Washington's new staff is officially official.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports and Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today. We're going to spend some extra time talking about the defensive line, highlighting Washington's pass rush, because there's a lot to like there. It's a group with a lot of potential, but we also haven't seen a lot just yet. We think that might be able to make a step forward in 2025. We'll jump into that, but we wanted to spend a lot of time talking about this coaching staff because Jedd Fisch has made a significant investment in it, and we're going to get to that, but Washington has also made a lot of new hires. We've seen a lot of people go elsewhere, a lot of members of the actual on-field coaching staff, but a lot of off-field personnel as well. And we've seen some promotions. We've seen some new guys come in. Again, now it's all officially official because it's posted on UW's website, which means the contracts have been finalized. So is there anyone that you kind of look at as you go through this new list and say, this really stands out, whether it be promotion or a new hire?
Well, I mean, I'll take the cheap answer, and we'll kind of go into Brian Odom first, just because he was the last official hire. And I think when you're looking at guys that were replacing Robert Bala and options that you had, you have to remember the context of the Robert Bala hire, which was, he was going to go be a DC somewhere else at a smaller school, and then ended up deciding to take the inside linebacker job at Washington. No real ties to Jedd. Brian Odom kind of in that similar mode. Has, I think, some ties to Ryan Walters, not a ton, but has enough ties to where it's like there's not no familiarity with the staff. But it's a great hire in terms of a guy who has plenty of experience. You don't lose any production there in terms of, now the guys that are in the room might want to transfer out in the spring because they don't like the new coach. And I think the weird thing is the amount of coaches getting hired from North Texas is off the charts right now. I mean, we're seeing many schools hire guys from North Texas and stuff like that. So it's the reason why I say that is I think Oregon just hired their offensive line coach. And
yep, that's right.
So my point in saying that is it's not like, why would getting a guy from North Texas? Wow. And it's like, no. If you remove North Texas from the bio, look at the rest of it too. And that's not a slight at North Texas, but I'm just saying for people that want to push back and say, why, if he's so good, why was he in North Texas? Well, some guys, if you ever go look at a coach's past, a lot of guys tend to actually take not a downward dip, but almost like take a step back in a bigger role to then go back up. And I think this is exactly what this is, where the linebacker position is going to be very important in this defense. And so I just think getting that hire right was so important. And as much as people want to say, hey, Cord Dennison, get a former UW alum, et cetera, I think this is probably one of the better hires you could have had just as a pure coach.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. When you said cheap answer, I thought you were talking about Matt Doherty, because Matt Doherty got promoted to the senior director of player personnel, which our buddy Scott Eklund highlighted over on dogman.com is essentially the general manager role, where we got our first opportunity as members of the media to talk to Matt Doherty in December during Washington signing day press conference. And he went in depth on scouting and roster additions and why they liked certain guys, which was great to hear. And it just kind of, the more you listen to that, the more it's like, okay, he is the de facto general manager, even though he doesn't have that official title. They promoted Jake Crawford, who you and I were big on for a recruiting position, to the director of player personnel from the assistant DPP job. So they're just making a lot of promotions on that side of the ball, on that side of the ball, in the front office, metaphorically speaking. But I think this is a really impactful hire because you're able to bring in guys to work on the high school level. I'm sure we'll get to Jaleel Wadood in a minute, and Silas Clapham, who's going to do some college scouting work and some different stuff on that side. So when I look at what this coaching staff and some of these off-field roles have turned into, it's looking a lot more like an NFL coaching staff. And I don't even mean that from the sense of buying into Jedd's be a pro, all that sort of stuff, which is, certainly part of it from his experience being around NFL teams. But I think it's more important on the side of this is what college football is turning into. whether you like it or not. And seeing Jedd and Washington as a whole be so out in front of all this in getting a de facto GM spot where, teams have different titles for that, especially in baseball. It's very prevalent where president of baseball operations, general manager, executive vice president, whatever the role is, there are a lot of different people who do that with different titles. So seeing that at Washington is very interesting. And I just think that it's all shaping up and moving in the right direction because we've seen this staff be very, very good at talent evaluation and acquisition.
Yeah, well, I think the important thing to consider is it's all layered because it's not just one guy being hired and saying, oh, hey, we got, not to equate it back to a coach, but like when you'd have hired Tomashoff way back when it's like, hey, that's our guy, that's our recruiter, that's our, X, Y, and Z. But everything's now on Tosh. It's now you have, like you mentioned, Jaleel Wadood and Marcus Griffin. So it's not just one or the other. When we talk about stacking talent on the roster, you have to stack talent to build the roster at the same point. And that's why getting all these hires is so important, where it's not just asking Marcus to do all this, where I'm sure he could, or asking Jaleel to do this, which I'm sure he could as being an NFL liaison in the DVP at UConn. So all these guys, and also you think about that, some guys going from director of player personnel to director of high school recruiting. So I'm glad you mentioned Jaleel Wadood because some people might view that as like a demotion. I think it's, again, more you're taking an opportunity at Washington. This is what Jedd came to do, and now what he's imploring others to do. He's building out his own coaching staff, building out his own front office, and you tie all this together with what you were saying about the GM and the contract stuff. You hired Mike Tannenbaum, and so you're hiring other people externally and internally, and then you throw in Cameron Foster, who I know is not just for the football program, but it's somebody within the athletic department who now – can kind of help oversee you. Now you have an external, internal, and guys underneath, not necessarily underneath Cameron Foster, but just kind of around to help facilitate everything as much as possible. And that's how you build a great program. You don't do it by just getting one or two guys. It's one or two or three or four at each position, at each level of the program. So that way everybody doesn't get burnt out. And then if somebody leaves, say, I don't know, let's say, Doherty won't leave, but let's just say somebody leaves, because again, can't speculate on that. But you all these promotions, then you can just keep promoting guys. And so it's not promotions aren't bad; it's continuity, and I think that's the other side of the thing. And one thing that I think will be good for fans that I don't know if you necessarily heard this, but Jedd's not necessarily hiring Jedd guys. He's going out and finding the best candidates. Now, sometimes he has relationships with guys, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing to hire your friends. But if your entire program is your friends and guys that if he had literally just transplanted the entire Arizona department up to Seattle, that would be a problem, which he hasn't done. He's done a lot of it, but he has got the right people from Arizona and brought the right people around. And also, I'm sure you want to talk about Silas, he's bringing guys with UW ties as well. So there's some familiarity as well.
So before we get to Silas, I wanted to talk about Jaleel Wadood because I think that this is a really important hire where you talk about director of high school recruiting. Lars, where is he from and where does he have the most connections? Los Angeles. Yeah, St. John Bosco, Los Angeles, Trinity League, that area of the country, which is, as we've said numerous times over the last couple of months here on the show, is something that will always be vital to building Washington's program, is succeeding on the recruiting trail in California and specifically in Southern California, because you've seen numerous high impact guys at Washington come from that area of the country. So shout out to my hometown, by the way. I gotta make sure that's in there. But I think that that's something that's really important in this sense, because when we look at what last year's coaching staff was off the field with Josh O'Mora, with Armand Hawkins, Armand was somebody who did have a lot of success in California and built a lot of relationships. And we've seen that, already pay off for him during his time in North Carolina. So that's one that I think is really important to focus on, because having somebody who can, just have that who played at Bosco, who played at UCLA and starred there really is something that's really vital, as you can, as you said, try to step outside of your normal footprint and not hire, Freddie Kitchens as your offensive coordinator and Matt Patricia and all that sort of stuff. That's the only shot I'm going to take in that regard. But I think that's very important because it shows up with Marcus Griffin as well. And that's a really interesting one. And it really speaks to Jedd's investment in the coaching staff. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. And the game tips off. The NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, Lars, you talked about Jedd stepping outside his comfort zone and making sure he's making the right hire and the best possible hire. I think Marcus Griffin is one of the best examples of that. Getting, he was in charge of recruiting. I think the official title was this DPP at Cal, and that's one of those hires where you look at that and you say he's got connections up and down the West Coast, which you and I talked about once that hire was first reported by Brandon Huffman. And the more I look at it, the more I look at all of these hires, whichever one you want to name, I think it just speaks to not only the quality of talent evaluators, but the quality of connections that all these guys have, being something that Jedd says, I know this is something we can continue to improve on.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head right at the end there. Continue to improve. You're hiring a lot of young guys, not young as in like raw, as in green, as in has no experience, but guys that could stay with him for 2-3 years at Washington, and then again, not that I'm going to predict anything, but let's say Jedd goes somewhere else. Maybe some follow Jedd, maybe some don't. But that's where you leave the program better than you found it. Well, I guess Jedd's case it's going to be kind of hard to do that. But with that being said, you're doing it to where you have possibilities, and you don't have, like you said, you're not hiring Freddie Kitchens, you're not hiring Mike Tannenbaum as your director of player personnel. You're hiring him as a outside counsel with the 33rd team, kind of just like, hey, you know what, just in case we need some contract help, just an extra voice, an extra person that I can call and say, hey, you know what, we have an agreement. We already got somebody else on the books on campus in Cameron Foster, like we mentioned, not just for the football program, because that's worth noting. Because I think every time we bring up Cameron Foster, a lot of it's going to be tied to football, but it is an athletic hire. It's not just for the football program specifically. But with that being said, there's a way in which you can kind of view it and say these guys are all buying into Jedd, and then that only helps on the recruiting trail. And in a way where we've talked about this off the record or off the show, where how long does Jedd stay at Washington? Well, all these hires and all these investments are clearly, like, if guys are moving from UConn to Seattle, like, clearly guys are willing to make that move and make that jump. It's not saying, oh, well, what's to say Jedd's not going to be there a year or two from now, so why would I leave and make that risk? It's like, well, no, because again, clearly whatever the risk is involved, people are willing to make that jump. And, you look at Corey Rush coming up from Portland State as another quality control guy, young pass rush coach, which will kind of tie into the third segment later on. But just all these younger hires where maybe that becomes the future D-line coach if Kafusi takes off, or something like that, where you have all the guys, or Aaron Van Horn, all of them are already in-house, so you don't have to react and say, oh, you know what? Okay, now we got to go do another search. Now we got to go find another coach. All the guys are already in the building, and so that's why all these kind of overlapping titles where it's like, wow, are you diluting the program? It's like, no, you're strengthening it, so in case one of them does leave down the road, you just bump the next guy up, and it's a lot more seamless transition.
No, absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that, I wanted to take a step back here and just look at this from afar, because it shows an increased commitment to football from the athletic department, where last year Jedd's coaching staff was just under what Kalen DeBoer's staff got, where that was like 7.3, 7.4 million, and Jedd's was somewhere between 7.1, 7.2. And one of the things he told us when he first got hired here was the availability of resources was one of the reasons he wanted to make this move to Washington. And he said, I'm going to be able to hire whoever I want and make sure I have, the best people in every single position, which, if everything goes the way I kind of expected to from the amount of hires that he's made, he's going to blow past that salary number that Kalen DeBoer's staff set in 2023, which, as we know, a lot of people got raises, a lot of people got bumps because everybody knew what the end goal was. It was to get to the national championship and win a national championship. So seeing what this investment is now that you're in the Big Ten, and now that you understand there are more resources coming down further down the line, whether it be from the House settlement, how that's going to impact revenue sharing, and a full Big Ten media share, what that's going to look like 3, 4, 5 years down the line. I think that all of that is really, really important for, not just whatever Jedd's end goal might be at Washington and however long he wants to end up staying around, but it's just really important to the future of the program and making sure, because, it's a big thing from the fan base is, hey, we want to make sure that this athletic department is committed to football and committed to winning. And by allowing Jedd to go out there and make as many hires as he possibly can, I feel like that shows that.
It does. And also when you think about making this investment now, as we've talked about potentially having a 10-win season, if you make the playoffs, now you cash in on that investment. Now you make all these hires become worthwhile, because it's like you went from 6-7 to call it 11-2, 12-2, 13, whatever you want to end up having it be this season. And even if it does, let's say you get to 9 and then 10 with a bowl, you're still making those improvements. But the point is, if you can get that playoff money, that's different, because then that cash out becomes, you can say, hey, look, here's your ROI, Pat Chung, per reference.
Yeah.
There. Like, here's your ROI. We made the playoffs. Here's your cut. We don't have a full, as you mentioned, we don't have a full media share. So we have to recoup that money in some other form. Obviously, Jedd will take some of his money and throw it to the Big One Club, or
the Go Big Fund, yeah,
the Go Big Fund, but it won't be the Big One Fund. That was good. But he's not going to take it out of his salary and pay his own assistants. But that's how you make that return on investment. And so for me, it's all the pieces are there on the roster. All the pieces are now there on the front office and on the coaching staff side, on the support staff side, for lack of a better term. Now this is why Jedd gets paid 7.5 plus, to maximize the heck out of it. And I think that's, to me, why this season is going to be so imperative. And it's not really fair to expect 10 wins, but at the same point, look at the schedule, look at the roster, look at the coach you brought in. Like, that's why you're making all these investments, is because you're not doing this and thinking, oh, we hired some offensive coordinator who's an up-and-comer and we're just going to try and see if we can, maximize this. No. You went and got out an established head coach who knows how to build a program. He's now built it the way he wants to, but now you got to go win. And if you can win this year and win next year, and then you become an annual winner, none of the money matters, because the money is just going to keep coming in. Like, people talked about Notre Dame, where it's like, hey, like, that money goes straight to Notre Dame. UW, not exactly in the case, but all that money does still trickle down to UW when you make the playoffs and things like that. So if you can make that return on investment, Pat's going to keep making Jedd hires as much as he wants to, because it's like, as long as you win, nothing else matters.
And to take that a step further, when you look at the 2023 season, it was all in on that season, right? You and I expected if Kalen was going to stay around long term, which, obviously that didn't go the way that we expected, but if he was, that there was going to be this increased commitment to winning and this increased commitment to spending. And there was, and we've seen that. But it was about building a sustainable program, which, as we saw with the amount of guys that left after the 2023 season, the amount of guys that transferred for, one reason or another, that it wasn't sustainable, because you invested a whole bunch of NIL funds in your top end stars, which is okay. That's not a bad thing. But as we know, that staff didn't recruit and wasn't as committed on the recruiting trail to building a top 15, top 20 class, as Jedd has openly talked about time and time again about. So it's about finding a way to make that investment sustainable, which having as much as you can on the support staff side, on the coaching staff side, is very, very important. And it's why you and I have continued to harp on recruiting so much, because that is where you need to continue to spend money and then you'll see the fruits of your labor a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line. And that's something where, when Jedd talks about playing young guys, that's part of that. When he talks about hiring as many quality people as he possibly can, that's all part of that. So I'm just curious to see where he can take it from here now.
But that's the thing, is like, there's in reality, aside from, again, yes, this could ultimately fail, but everything, the trajectory is just, ascending upwards. And I think, as you were kind of laying it out there, having a director of high school recruiting and relations for Jaleel Wadood to go focus on high school, Silas being able to do college scouting, and you look at that thing, portal guys, high school guys, both still have guys above them that kind of, and everybody, it becomes like a big, what's the melting pot? There we go. Yeah. Where, like, and in a way where it's, hey, I have a relationship with this person. Oh, I have a relationship with this person. Okay, cool. So it all ends up working out better for UW. And then it just, everything. None of these hires scream, I'm concerned. It's more or less like, man, just what can you do with this? Like, can you maximize this? And I think Jedd can. But, the frustrating part is we got March, April, May, June, July, August to figure that one out before we can actually start to see the fruits of that labor come to fruit.
So one thing I kind of want to wrap this up on is because when we saw the promotion of Jimmy Doherty and the promotion of Michael Switzer to offensive coordinator and offensive line coach respectively, there was a major, I don't want to say like just backfire from the fan base, but a lot of fans were not happy about it because they said, why aren't you, going out and trying to find somebody that's can just be a top dollar hire? Like we go see Penn State hire Jim Leonhard for whatever he got, $4 million a year, where Jedd was more focused on continuity on that side of the ball. And as you and I highlighted, that's really important. And having a whole bunch of guys, whether it be on the recruiting and the off-field side of things or on the on-field, all of that is really important when you think about JP Losman, when you think about Mike Brewster. Having some of those guys in the building already is really, really important. And it speaks to continuity and it speaks to investment where those hires might fly under the radar and we might not hear a lot about some of those guys. Just let's be real, we might not. But if we look at it in, let's say, 2 years where, as you've noted a couple of times, Tom Pelissero quote tweeted you and said, hey, Jimmy Doherty got some NFL interest this season, but he decided to stick around at Washington. Let's say he does leave for an NFL OC job in a year or two and Jedd Fisch is still around. All of a sudden, hey, maybe JP Losman, who has been the assistant quarterbacks coach, can take that job and maybe Jedd finds a new offensive coordinator, whatever it might be. All of a sudden, that continuity being around, that's the fruits of the labor right there. But that's something that it might take a little bit more time to pan out. And Lars, something that might not take as much time, we might see a big jump forward from, is Washington's pass rush. So Lars, you highlighted Corey Rush a little bit. Watching Washington's pass rush this season is going to be really interesting. We talked about this a little bit on yesterday's show, saying we expect the defensive line as a whole to take a jump forward. And a lot of that is due to injuries. We didn't see Russell Davis for the majority of last season. We didn't see Zach Durfee for the majority of last year. And now what was a really, really crowded room, we've seen a bunch of guys hit the portal, whether it be Lance Holtzclaw, Maurice Himes, Jaden Wayne. It's a little bit more thinned out. And that's going to be really interesting because we look at some of the guys that they brought in. Those are a little bit more projection long-term additions, especially when you think about, Victor Sanchez-Hernandez, Caleb Smith, like guys that could play on the edge where I think Caleb Smith might end up moving inside a little bit more. But I look at some of those guys and I say, all right, I understand the vision, but that's going to take a couple of years to pan out. So right now you look at the defensive line, at the outside linebackers, whatever it's going to be. And I think there's a lot of potential there, but it's going to be one of those same things where you kind of have to see it on the field.
Right. Well, and I think that's you hit the nail on the head with Durfee and Davis, where the D&D Smash Bros. Where I don't know if you ever played Dungeons and Dragons, but it's one of those things where
Can't say I have.
I'm not a big guy of it either, but just the analogy worked really well. Where you think about it, Russell Davis went off against UCLA. I know his dad said he wore that purple Hawaiian shirt for the first time. That was like the one time. So, well, hey, maybe break that out every single game. And that was kind of the frustrating part about Russell Davis is when we got to see him in spring, it was like, oh, okay, this guy's got potential. And then, you see like he was going to be the next guy up at Arizona. And I think when you pair those two with Tai Tagovailoa and potentially Ontario Thompson and Jacob Lane, and you go down that list, there's still bodies in that room. I'm just curious who emerges kind of in that mold behind him. Also, Lance Holtzclaw is gone as well. So you see who's kind of going to be that next Lance, where not, we both were kind of perplexed that he didn't get as much snaps last season, especially towards the end. But just who can kind of be, because on one hand, having two great premier edges in Russell Davis and Zach Durfee, if that's what they turn out to be, is good. But as much as we've seen in college football, I'm sure Ryan Walters would agree, you want bodies to continue to throw and just round after round after round. You don't want just one, try not to quit. We don't want one bow and arrow. You want a whole quiver.
Right. So I think that's where Tai Tagovailoa becomes really, really important because that just kind of hit me as you were saying that where, we've talked about him playing both inside and outside. And I think with, everything you're just saying, it makes that even more vital because he's a guy where if you want to play him across from Zach Durfee because you're playing a team that loves to run the ball downhill, great. I think that's very possible. And if you're, you want him to move inside and rush the passer or even defend the run from in there because you want, whether it be Isaiah Ward, Jacob Lane, Zach Durfee, Russell Davis, whatever combination of those two, of two outside linebackers you want to throw out there, I think it makes sense, and I think you can find a way to make it work because you have a very versatile chess piece. And we know the impact he's made at Arizona. It's 45 pressures over the last 2 seasons, where that might not be a massive number, but on a defense like this, where we need to see this defensive line take a step forward, especially on the interior with all the injuries and some of the struggles we saw last season, that could turn out to be very, very valuable. Because let's say, let's cut 45 and a half. I know that math doesn't really make sense. And since you love over-unders, it'd be 22 and a half in terms of pressures that he adds to the season. I think that could be very valuable if we get 12 games of Russell Davis, if you get 12 games of Zach Durfee, Isaiah Ward, all of a sudden, and then, some of these guys on the interior take a step forward, whether it be Bryce Butler and Linnaeus Davis. It's the depth. And we talked about it a little bit yesterday, and we wanted to make sure we could go a little more in depth on it. That depth, no pun intended there, that depth is really, really important because, as we said, that was not there last year. And you go back and you watch Iowa, you watch the Indiana game, you watch the Penn State game, they just got straight up run out of the building. Again, no pun intended, but it's because they were getting the ball run down their throat over and over and over and over again. And having 6, 7, 8 defensive linemen that are healthy and can rotate in the middle of the defense is going to make a massive difference.
Yeah, I think that's also why getting a Big Ten defensive coordinator who actually knows the conference, and no slight to Steve Belichick there, but I just think there was some part of his defense where it's, I'm going to run my plan versus what I probably should adjust. But then part of you, as you mentioned, you don't have the bodies. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword there. But I'm glad you also mentioned Isaiah Ward because that was somebody where we were pretty high on him. But then the first half of the season, you're playing a bunch of passing teams. Like you don't run or run teams. Whereas you're only seeing him basically half the season because he's not going to be a big factor in the run game, which is why I think getting Ty was so important because Zach Durfee, as Jedd mentioned last season, was a guy where, he's a great pass rusher, but I think we're missing him a little more in the run game than we initially might have thought. That wasn't a slight initially. It was just like, you think of him more so as a edge rusher, pass rusher, a guy that can push the pocket, not necessarily a guy that was going to be defending the run. And then it was like, ooh, okay, maybe we should. And then, of course, he has the double toe injury and X, Y, and Z. And so just everything kind of last season was unfair to judge for Zach Durfee. So now you look at this season, probably not going to participate that much in spring camp. I don't think he should. That's just my personal opinion because, again, everything matters in the fall. If you have Zach Durfee come back, let's say midway through spring camp and something else happens, like what are we doing here? Now, you can never truly prevent injuries because in that case, nobody would practice. But with that being said, I think, part of it is just getting everybody's body right between now and August so that when you get to fall camp in August, you can say, Durfee's completely healthy. Ward's healthy. Russell Davis is healthy. Everybody's healthy. The only one that might not be would be Jacob Manu, but that's a different position for a different day. But you talk about bringing pass rush, maybe having a few different guys kind of come in that outside linebacker off the edge mold. All those pieces are there. You just got to kind of pick and choose which ones you want to send at certain times.
So I'm actually really glad you brought up Jacob Manu because the entire time you were talking about that, I was kind of thinking, well, you could add to that depth with another inside linebacker if you wanted to. And, we know Jacob Manu is still coming off the ACL tear that he suffered in October. And as he said, it's up on our YouTube page and on all our social media. Go follow us wherever you can, by the way. But he said, everything is on the table right now in terms of what the plan is. I could redshirt, I could play, whatever that plan is. If you want to stick, I don't think he would be the guy just based on his body type. But hey, if you feel really comfortable, I think X-Ray Alexander is the perfect guy to highlight in this mold, just from the inside linebackers, because you could throw him on the outside if you wanted to and have him play a role similar to what Kamari House did or Alfonso Tupatala did at times during the 2024 season, where when Ryan Walters has talked about his scheme and talked about how it's going to be somewhat similar in terms of fitting the players, I think that's one thing that's really important, where it's just something to think about. Because if you think, hey, one way that we can get more depth is by having our linebackers be just as versatile as they were last year, that could help you out a lot. And if, X-Ray Alexander can bring a little bit off the edge as a pass rusher, or, Buda Alukta is able to do something, all it does is add to the versatility that you can just throw at opposing offensive lines and offensive coordinators that they have to prepare for, which is, again, it's nothing more than something to think about, but I think there's something there.
And ironically, you kind of hit the nail on the head again, where that's all you're trying to do as the defensive coordinator is give the opposing offense something to think about. Oh, maybe we have to defend against this. Maybe we have to defend against that look. And then off of those two looks, you can have 3 or 4 different options where sometimes does actually come in pressure, and sometimes he maybe does drop back, and that's how you bait guys into making bad decisions. And so all of these hires and all of these additions end up being, more arrows to kind of throw, where all you need is just options. That's all last season proved, is as many options as you can have. And yeah, if somebody's not happy with their playing time, okay, you sort that out later. You'd rather have the guy on the roster than take a flyer on some guy, just say, hey, he's not going to complain if he doesn't end up making the cut. You want all the best guys in the room. And so I think when you look at it, and also I remember talking to Extra Alexander at that February, kind of shindig, and he said, everywhere I've been, I've taken the next step. And so maybe a next step in his game with pairing with Ryan Walters is having more of a pass rush presence. And I think, especially with Buddha being more of that kind of, rover, he had a few picks and things like that. Again, missed tackles being what they are, whatever. But I think maybe you look at those two and say, play off of each other and use one as a disguise, and then you can flip them and just see which one ends up having both. And then they both become better linebackers for it. Becomes a better defense for it. And again, this is why, to tie this whole thing together, this is why you go and make these big investments. It's why you go and don't just promote Robert. No, as much as we like Robert Balla, you don't just promote Robert Balla to DC when Steve leaves. You go and find the best defensive coordinator, in Jedd's words, in the country, in Ryan Walters, and you let him kind of figure out whatever he wants to round out his staff with.
So one more thing on the versatility front, because it plays into everything. You and I have been very high on this group of safeties that you go out and invest in the transfer portal. If you want to walk one of those guys down, it all trickles down. You can move the linebackers. You can help out with the defensive line and just continue to add to the depth. And if the guys in the front seven are healthy and fresh and rotating regularly, and you feel comfortable where they are as run defenders, that is a significant step forward from what you had last season. And that is really important. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all everybody who's tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.